I never planned to be invisible. But that was the strange thing about working at the countryside cafe just off the highway. After a while, invisibility became part of the uniform. People saw the apron before they saw the person. They heard the accent before they heard the thoughts. They judged the cracked nails, the sun-warmed skin, the way my shoes carried dust instead of polish. Out here, you learned quickly who mattered and who didn't, at least in other people's eyes. That afternoon began like any other. The bell above the cafe door chimed, sharp and impatient, slicing through the low hum of ceiling fans and the smell of frying onions. I was wiping down the counter, my reflection warped in the steel surface. Brown hair pulled into a messy knot, face bare, eyes tired but alert. Then she walked in. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was subtler than that. The air seemed to tighten as if the cafe itself had straightened its spine. She wore a tailored ivory blazer that didn't belong anywhere near gravel roads and tractor fields. Her heels clicked once against the tile, precise and deliberate, before stopping. Sunglasses hid her eyes, but I could feel her gaze already measuring the room, calculating, dismissive, sharp. People like her didn't come here by accident. Behind her followed two men in suits and a woman with a tablet pressed to her chest like a shield. They whispered as they walked, leaning toward her, nodding quickly, desperately trying to keep pace. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew her type. Power lived in her posture. Control sat comfortably on her shoulders. She chose a table near the window, away from everyone else. One of the men pulled out a chair for her. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. I grabbed a menu and approached, professional smile fixed in place. The kind you learn to wear so often it stops feeling like a mask and starts feeling like your real face. "Good afternoon," I said. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" She looked up then, removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were steel gray, unreadable, sharp enough to cut through excuses. They skimmed over me in less than a second before flicking back to the menu, as if I were a piece of furniture that had spoken out of turn. "Sparkling water," she said. Her voice was low, calm, authoritative, room temperature. One of the men cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Hale were running behind. "I said sparkling water," she repeated, not raising her voice. The room didn't need to hear it. The command was already complete. The man fell silent. I nodded, "I'll be right back." As I turned away, I heard her say it, quietly, carelessly. Why do these places never train their staff properly? The words weren't meant for me. That somehow made them worse. Heat rose behind my eyes, but I swallowed it down. I'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't something people handed you. It was something you practiced in silence. I brought the water, set it gently on the table, condensation already beating along the glass. "Anything else?" I asked. She glanced at her watch, a sleek, expensive thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Coffee black," then after a pause, "and something quick. We don't have time for rustic delays." "Rustic?" One of the men smiled awkwardly at me, as if apologizing with his eyes. I didn't respond. I simply nodded and turned back toward the counter. Behind me, I heard her again. "Honestly, I don't know how people live like this." Like this. I wondered what she would say if she knew this cafe had paid for my education. If she knew I read business journals during my breaks. If she knew that I'd turned down 3 job offers in the city because my life, my real life, was rooted here. But I said nothing. That was when Lena walked in. Lena, my best friend Maya's mother. She didn't enter with an entourage. No assistants, no clicking heels, just a soft cotton blouse, jeans faded by time, and that familiar calm she carried like a second heartbeat. She paused when she saw me, her lips curving into a gentle smile that reached her eyes. "Hey," she said. That single word felt like a hand on my back, steadying me. "Hi, Lena," I replied, relief slipping into my voice before I could stop it. She took a seat at the counter. Busy day. Same as always. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the table by the window. She noticed everything, always had. "Looks like trouble," she murmured. I almost laughed. "Just passing through," I said. But Lena didn't look convinced. Behind us, the woman, Ms. Hale, was growing impatient. I could hear it in the sharp tap of her fingers against the table. When I returned with her coffee, she took one sip and frowned. "This is lukewarm." "I can remake it," I offered immediately. She sighed, long and theatrical. "No, we don't have time for incompetence." The word landed hard. Lena's hand stilled around her mug. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "There's no charge." For the first time, Ms. Hale looked directly at me, really looked. Something flickered in her eyes then, surprise maybe, or irritation that I hadn't shrunk. "You should take pride in your work," she said, "even if it's limited." Lena stood. "I think that's enough," she said calmly. Ms. Hale turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me." "You heard her," Lena replied. "She's doing her job, and she's doing it well." One of the men shifted uncomfortably. The assistant tightened her grip on the tablet. Ms. Hale studied Lena, assessing her like a chess piece. "And you are?" "Someone who believes respect costs nothing," Lena said. For a moment, the air felt charged, two worlds facing each other across a scratched cafe floor. Then Ms. Hale stood. "Let's go," she said to her team. "I won't spend another minute in a place that encourages mediocrity." They followed her out, the bell chiming sharply behind them. The cafe exhaled. I realized my hands were shaking. Lena sat back down, looked at me with that steady warmth. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, then shook my head, then laughed softly because it was either that or cry. "She didn't mean it personally," I said automatically. Lena's gaze sharpened, not with anger but with certainty. "Yes," she said, "she did." I looked at the door she'd left through, dust already settling behind her expensive tires. I had no idea then who she really was. No idea that our paths were far from finished crossing. No idea that the woman who had dismissed me as nothing would one day be forced to see everything. But something told me, quietly, insistently, that justice had a way of being patient. And that this was only the beginning. The woman in the ivory blazer should have vanished from my life the moment the cafe door swung shut behind her. People like her passed through places like ours all the time, leaving judgment behind like exhaust fumes, then disappearing back into worlds paved with privilege. But she didn't disappear. 2 days later, the cafe was quieter than usual. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, turning dust motes into gold. I was refilling sugar jars when the bell chimed again. I didn't need to look up to know. The room shifted, just like before. This time she was alone. No assistants, no men in suits, no armor of sunglasses, just the same immaculate posture, the same deliberate steps, the same presence that demanded attention even when she clearly didn't want to give any back. She stopped just inside the door, scanning the cafe as if reassessing an old decision. When her eyes landed on me, something tightened in her jaw. Regret, annoyance, pride. She chose the same table by the window. I stayed where I was for a moment longer than necessary, steadying my breath. Lena's words echoed in my mind. Yes, she did mean it. I walked over. "What can I get you?" I asked. She looked up slowly, studying my face as if seeing it for the first time. Without the entourage, without the performance, she seemed different, still controlled, still sharp, but quieter. "Coffee," she said, "black hot." I nodded, no apology, no smile. When I returned, she took a sip. This time, she didn't complain. Instead, she surprised me. "I was rude the other day," she said, eyes fixed on the cup. "That was unprofessional." The word was carefully chosen. It cost her something to say it, I could tell. I waited. She looked up then, meeting my gaze fully. Her eyes weren't steel now. They were tired. "I'm under a lot of pressure," she added, as if that explained everything. "It usually doesn't," I replied before I could stop myself. Silence fell between us, thick, uncomfortable. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a short sound real. "You're honest," she said. "That's rare." "So is respect," I answered. Another pause, longer this time. "My name is Alina Hale," she said finally, "and I don't make a habit of returning to places where I've been corrected." I raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" She considered the question carefully. "Because I don't like unfinished things." I didn't know what she meant, but something about the way she said it made my pulse quicken. Over the next week, Alina kept coming back. Always alone, always precise, always watching. At first, she spoke little, just coffee, sometimes food, always exact change placed neatly on the table. But slowly, conversations slipped in. Comments about the road conditions, observations about the regulars, questions she pretended were casual but clearly weren't. "You've worked here long?" she asked one afternoon. "Long enough," I said. "Why here?" she pressed. "You don't seem limited." There it was again, that assumption, softer now but still sharp. "I choose this," I replied evenly. She studied me like a puzzle she hadn't expected to enjoy solving. One evening, Lena stopped by near closing time. When she saw Alina, recognition flashed between them, brief but unmistakable. Alina stiffened. "You," she said. "Me," Lena replied calmly. The air grew tense. Alina stood. "I owe you an apology, too." Lena tilted her head. "For what?" "For assuming authority belonged to me," Alina said. Lena smiled gently. "It usually does until it doesn't." Something shifted then, not just between them, but inside Alina herself. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "You should come to the city sometime," she said to me. "See how the other half lives." I met her gaze, steady and unafraid. "I already know," I said. She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth she wasn't ready to admit. As the door closed behind her, Lena looked at me thoughtfully. "Be careful," she said softly. "People like her don't fall easily." I watched the road where Alina's car disappeared, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. Neither do people like me. And somewhere between coffee cups and quiet conversations, I realized this wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about reckoning. By the second week, Alina's visits had become predictable enough to unsettle me. Same time, same table, same black coffee. But nothing else about her felt routine. She listened now, really listened. When I spoke, she didn't interrupt or correct or redirect. Her attention was intense, almost unnerving, like she was used to rooms bending toward her words, and now she was forcing herself to do the opposite. I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, not the way men watched, not appraisal or hunger, it was quieter than that, curious, searching. One afternoon, the café was packed. A tour bus had broken down nearby and the place filled with loud voices and impatience. Orders piled up, tempers frayed. Alina stood at the counter, waiting. A man in a pressed shirt shoved past her. "Some of us are in a hurry," he snapped, waving cash. I opened my mouth to respond, but Alina moved first. "There's a line," she said calmly. The man scoffed, "Mind your business." Alina didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "It is my business," she replied. "You're being rude." The man laughed. "And who are you supposed to be?" For a split second, I thought she might say it. Her title, her power, whatever name made people straighten their backs and swallow their words. But she didn't. "I'm someone who remembers what it feels like to be dismissed," she said. The man muttered something and backed off. When it was her turn, I slid her coffee across the counter. Our fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a strange jolt through me, like touching a live wire and pretending you hadn't felt the shock. "Thank you," she said softly. Later, after closing, she lingered. "You don't belong here," she said suddenly. I stiffened. "You don't get to decide that." "I know," she replied quickly. "That's not what I meant. I meant this place doesn't see you." I wiped the counter slowly. "Most places don't." "That's wrong," she said. "And I should know. I built my career on deciding who mattered." The honesty in her voice unsettled me more than cruelty ever had. A few days later, she asked me to have dinner with her. Not at the café, not casually. "I'll be in town overnight," she said. "There's a restaurant, nothing fancy. I'd like to talk somewhere quieter." I should have said no. Instead, I found myself standing across from her that evening, suddenly hyper-aware of my dress, my accent, the way my world and hers weren't meant to overlap. Dinner was easy, too easy. We talked about failure, about loneliness, about the cost of always being right. She told me she'd rejected every man she'd dated, not out of arrogance, but exhaustion. "They wanted the idea of me," she said, "not the reality." And what's the reality? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, that I'm tired of winning. Something in her expression made my chest ache. At the end of the night, outside the restaurant, she hesitated. I don't usually do this, she said. Let people see me unsure. I met her gaze, neither do I. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between us. Her breath, mine, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Then she stepped back. Good night, she said. The next morning, she didn't come to the cafe. Or the day after. Then rumors started. A massive development deal, land acquisitions, the countryside cafe's land, our land on the list. When Lena told me, my stomach dropped. Eleanor Hale, CEO, power broker. The woman who'd learned my coffee order. The woman I'd almost trusted. I stared at the empty table by the window, the silence suddenly deafening. I'd been underestimated my whole life. This time the betrayal hurt more, because it had worn kindness like a disguise. And I didn't yet know that Eleanor was about to face the cost of every assumption she'd ever made. The confirmation came on a Wednesday morning, delivered in Lena's quiet, careful voice. They're finalizing permits, she said. A commercial complex, offices, parking structures, the cafe is inside the development zone. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. I stared at the counter I'd wiped 1,000 times, the floor I knew by heart, the window where Eleanor always sat. So that's it, I asked. They just take it. Lena sighed. That's usually how power works. I didn't come to work the next day. For the first time in years, I stayed home, sitting on the small porch of my rented place, listening to the wind move through the fields. I felt foolish, naive for believing that someone like Eleanor could see me as anything other than a temporary curiosity. Late afternoon, my phone buzzed. Eleanor Hale. I didn't answer. She called again. Then a text. Please, I need to explain. Explain what? That she'd been kind only until it conflicted with her interests. That respect had limits once money entered the room. I drove into town instead. The cafe was closed early, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. A handwritten sign taped to the door announced a temporary closure. The word temporary mocked me. Eleanor stood across the street. No blazer, no heels, just a simple coat, hair pulled back, tension etched into every line of her body. When she saw me, relief flashed across her face, followed quickly by guilt. I didn't know, she said immediately. I swear to you I didn't know it was this place. I crossed my arms. You expect me to believe that? Yes, she said, voice breaking slightly, because I stopped the deal the moment I found out. That stopped me. You what? She stepped closer. The board wasn't happy. They think I'm compromising my judgment. And are you? I asked. She met my gaze without flinching. Yes, for the first time in my life, and I don't regret it. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. I grew up not far from here, she continued quietly. My mother worked 2 jobs. Places like this cafe kept us alive. Somewhere along the way I forgot. I searched her face for calculation, for manipulation. I didn't find it. They listened to me because I've never asked them to, she said, until now. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Why? Because of you, she said simply. Because you reminded me who I was before power taught me to look away. Tears burned behind my eyes, unwelcome and dangerous. I don't want your guilt, I said, or your charity. She nodded. Then don't take it. Take my accountability. A car slowed nearby. A passerby stared. The world felt suddenly small, intimate. I don't expect forgiveness, Eleanor said, but I couldn't let this happen without you knowing the truth. I looked past her at the cafe, at the place that had shaped me. I don't know if I can trust you, I said. She swallowed. I know. That night, Lena came by. She fought them, Lena said after I told her everything. Really fought them. I don't know what that means for us, I replied. Lena smiled softly. Sometimes justice doesn't come as punishment, sometimes it comes as change. I lay awake long after she left, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, Eleanor Hale wasn't the woman with all the answers. She was someone standing at the edge of her own reckoning. And I was no longer invisible. The fallout was louder than I expected. Within days, the town buzzed with rumors. The development deal was under review. Investors were uneasy. Alina Hale's name, once spoken with distant awe, was now tangled in whispered disbelief. She halted a multi-million project for a café. People didn't say my name, but I felt it in every sentence. Alina didn't come back to town. Not at first. I assumed she'd been pulled back into her world of glass towers and boardrooms, where consequences wore suits and smiles. Then the letter arrived. Not an email, not a press release. A letter, handwritten. She wrote about her first job at 16, about being underestimated, talked over, dismissed, about promising herself she'd never be powerless again, and how that promise had slowly turned into armor she forgot to take off. Power isn't the same as worth, she wrote. I confused the two, you didn't. I read it 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in a drawer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. The real reckoning came a week later. A public hearing. The company sent representatives, lawyers, consultants, people trained to sound reasonable while taking everything. Then Alina walked in. No entourage, no theatrics. Just truth. She stood at the podium while the room murmured. This project will not proceed, she said clearly. Not because it isn't profitable, but because it is wrong. Gasps, protests, confusion. She continued. We talk about revitalization while erasing the people who give a place its soul. I approved plans like this for years. Today, I refuse. Someone accused her of emotional compromise. Another questioned her leadership. She didn't flinch. If leadership means ignoring harm, she said, then I'm willing to redefine it. The vote followed. The project was rejected. Instant karma doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it comes as exposure. By evening, headlines spread, analysts debated, shareholders panicked. Alina Hale had chosen principle over profit. She lost contracts, influence, allies. She gained something else. That night she stood outside the café as the lights flickered back on. I was there, sweeping the porch. I don't expect this to change anything between us, she said quietly, but I wanted you to see it. I met her eyes, really met them. You stood up, I said. That matters. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. I don't need redemption, she replied. I need to be better. The town would talk for years. About the CEO who chose a café. About the woman who lost power and found herself. But as Alina stood there, no longer towering, no longer untouchable, I realized justice had already been served. Not to punish her, but to transform her. And for the first time, I let myself wonder what might grow in the space where fear used to live. The café didn't just reopen. It breathed. The morning we unlocked the doors again, sunlight spilled across the floor like a blessing. The bell chimed, not sharp this time, but welcoming. Regulars returned first, farmers, retirees, travelers who had nowhere else to stop and everything to say. Then came people I'd never seen before, curious faces, respectful ones. Word had traveled. Not just about the deal that fell apart, but about why. I stood behind the counter, apron tied, hands steady. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for dismissal. I was grounded. Lena watched from a corner table, pride soft in her eyes. You did this, she said when I brought her coffee. No, I replied, we did. Alina didn't come that day. Or the next. I told myself it didn't matter. Justice had been served, the story was complete. But stories, I was learning, rarely end when you expect them to. She arrived a week later. No blazer, no heels, just jeans, a sweater, and nerves she didn't bother hiding. She stood uncertainly near the door until I met her gaze. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. She ordered coffee, black hot, paid, then waited. I resigned, she said quietly once we were alone. I froze, you didn't have to. I wanted to, she interrupted gently. I spent years defining myself by a title. Turns out it was holding me hostage. I studied her face. She looked lighter, not happier yet, but freer. What now? I asked. She smiled, small and real. Now I figure out who I am without everyone else deciding. We talked slowly, carefully about fear, about rebuilding, about how power can isolate as much as it protects. Days passed, then weeks. She stayed, not as a savior, not as a spectacle. As a person, she helped repaint the cafe walls, burned toast, learned names, laughed, really laughed when she spilled sugar all over herself and didn't know where the broom was kept. The town noticed. Some forgave quickly, others didn't. Alina accepted both. One evening after closing, we sat on the porch, feet resting on worn wooden steps, fireflies blinking in the dark. I rejected every man because I thought needing someone was weakness, she said softly. I looked at her, and now I know better. She didn't touch me, didn't push, just waited. I reached for her hand. It felt like choosing something earned. Respect didn't arrive with her title. Love didn't come from her power. Justice wasn't about humiliation, but humility. Months later, the cafe became something else too. A community space, a symbol, a reminder. People stopped judging so quickly. And Alina Hale. She stopped being untouchable. She became human. As for me, I was never invisible again. Because the greatest instant karma isn't watching someone fall. It's watching them rise differently. Together, they thought the story ended where the headlines stopped. That the fall of a CEO and the saving of a small-town cafe was the final, satisfying note, the kind audiences applauded before moving on. But real lives didn't follow neat arcs. They kept going quietly long after the spotlight faded. The cafe became busier than it had ever been. Not louder, just fuller, conversations lingered. Strangers shared tables, people asked questions instead of making assumptions. It wasn't magic, it was practice. Respect repeated daily until it felt normal. Alina never tried to reclaim authority. She refused interviews, declined offers. When someone recognized her and whispered, she simply nodded and kept wiping tables. Power no longer announced itself through her. One afternoon, a woman in a sharp suit came in, eyes scanning the room with familiar calculation. She looked at Alina, then at me, and smirked. "You could do better," she said to Alina quietly. "You're wasting potential here." Alina didn't flinch. "I'm using it," she replied. The woman scoffed and left. I felt something shift then, not triumph, not anger, but certainty. Later that evening, when the cafe emptied and the sky turned amber, Alina sat beside me on the porch steps. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. "The power?" She considered the question honestly. "I miss the illusion," she said. "The idea that control could protect me from being hurt." "And now I know being seen is riskier," she admitted, "but it's real." I leaned my head against her shoulder, not because I needed to, because I wanted to. The next week, a local scholarship was announced, funded quietly, anonymously for students who worked service jobs and dreamed beyond them. Alina never attached her name. She didn't need to. People began telling their own stories. About times they'd been dismissed, about chances they never thought they'd get, about how seeing someone choose humility over dominance made them rethink their own power, however small. Justice, it turned out, was contagious. One night as we closed up, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked older than I used to, stronger, grounded, someone who knew her worth without needing permission. Alina stood behind me, slipping her jacket on. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not letting me stay who I was." I smiled. "You did the hard part." Outside, the road stretched quiet and open, no destination announced, no hierarchy enforced. Just two women walking forward, changed, accountable, and awake. Not because karma struck fast, but because respect, once learned, refused to leave.